I'm going to start up by quoting back to you something that you said earlier in May. It was after President Trump's tweet. But you said, that, talking about the U.S. China relations, both sides want a deal, and I think both sides need a deal. So in any deal, there's always ups and downs. But I think this will get worked out, and I do believe by the end of the summer, certainly a deal will get done. Do you think that today, the way you did on May 8th?
I still think a deal will get done. If it's not the end of the summer, I think it'll be early in the fall, because both sides, I think, really need a deal. The Chinese economy has been weak. I think the Chinese government recognizes it's not been helped by the sanctions that are going on or the tariffs. And the president's view is that he's got a stronger leverage now. But I think as the U.S. economy weakens a bit, there's going to be more pressure on him to get some deal done. And I think his negotiators recognize this. So I think something late summer, early fall will get done, yes.
So that makes perfect sense, but you've been in Washington for a while now. This president is different from some others in some ways. One way may be when he says something, he usually means it. He says he loves tariffs. He thinks it's a beautiful word. He seems to believe that tariffs actually make the U.S. economy stronger. Is there something going to dissuade him of that?
Well, I think some of his advisors have said that the tariffs are hurting, in fact, hurting his constituents in the Midwest. Farmers are not liking this so much. And I do think you're seeing more pressure increasing from his own advisors saying that, for example, tariffs on Mexico are not something that would be advisable. So I do think that he will get the message, and he does understand that tariffs are not something you normally need to do. So I think the history of tariffs throughout the last 100 years or so is that they do not produce better economic results for either economy, the one that has the tariffs imposed, the ones that's imposing them. So that history will ultimately be reflected in the fact that a deal will get done, in my view.
So to David's point, it feels like though we're still living in a new kind of paradigm where tariffs can be bandied about even as threats, for example, where you're looking at protectionism from the U.S., the huge lack of leadership from the U.S. that was talk and now it's reality. How do you look at that?
Well, if you're president of the United States, you can't pass legislation by yourself. You can't today go to war by yourself that readily. What can you do by yourself? You can impose tariffs largely. So it is a tool the president has found that he can use, and he can do it by himself unilaterally. So it does give him some real leverage, and then ultimately there'll be some back and forth. But I think it's a tool that he can use that enables him to do something that he can't do in other ways so readily.
David, put this in a larger historical context, which is what you like to do. Is this another tariff dispute, or is this really an historic transition from a number 2 rising power, rapidly rising power economically in China, overtaking dominant power, and a president of the United States who really wants to at least slow that down, if not reverse it?
Graham Allison's written a book about this called Thucydides' Trap, and it basically says that throughout history you have rising powers, and when they're challenging the existing power, you often have military disputes. Actually, in some cases you don't have military disputes. I don't think there's a military dispute here, but clearly when the number 2 is rising and the number 1 is not rising as fast, there's problems. It's very rare that the number 1 economic power in the world, number 2 economic power in the world get along very well. Actually, we've gotten along much better than you would have expected. China is rising, but I think the United States is not really sinking. We're just still rising slower than the Chinese are rising. I do think that it's in both best interest of both countries to get a deal worked out, and I think the negotiators know that, and I think the principals, Xi Jinping and President Trump, know that, and I do believe a deal will get done.
So when you talk to companies, CEOs, people out there, like, what's the idea? Are they holding money on the sidelines? Are they waiting to invest until there's clarity? What does it mean? Like, what's your take on the street?
Well, nobody really knows when the next slowdown is going to occur. Typically, since World War II, we've had slowdowns or recessions every 7 years on average. Now we're almost 10 years into this growth cycle. So people are worried, when will this slowdown occur? And you don't know when it's going to happen. The skies don't open up and say, okay, now the recession's here. It happens a little bit more gradually. Right now, there's a concern that if the tariffs war keep going on, we don't have our trade agreements worked out, eventually you could go into a slowdown. So I think the president will feel some pressure to get something resolved soon, because I think his advisors recognize that the economy is slowing down slightly.
You've referred to the president's advisors several times. Are we confident that he listens to his advisors? Because it seems to be when his advisors disagree with him, he replaces the advisors.
Well, he has advisors that he does listen to. I think, for example, Bob Lighthizer is his special trade representative. I think he really respects him. I think he really listens to Larry Kudlow as well. So I do think, and I think he listens to Steve Mnuchin. Yeah, he doesn't agree with them all the time, but no president agrees with his advisors all the time. I do think he listens to them, but with President Trump, you have to be very persuasive.
What do you think about growth for this year in the U.S. and next year?
I think growth is likely to be around 2.2, 2.3%, to be honest. I don't think it's going to be 3%. I think with an economy of our size, 2.3, 2.4 is not bad. But I think the days of 4% and 5% growth in an economy of our size are unrealistic. China is probably growing at somewhere between 5 and 6%. Lower than they want, but higher than some people think that they are growing at. I think they're probably growing at somewhere between 5 and 6%. It's hard to know because their statistics are a little vague sometimes.
The growth that we have had in the United States has been supported by the tax cuts. I think everyone would agree with that. That comes at a price of borrowing money.
Yes.
Thus far, the world has wanted to buy our paper, as it were. They want to borrow our money. At what point do we become concerned that that might not be true?
Well, I've been worried about that for quite some time. To put it in context, we have $22 trillion of federal debt, $22 trillion. The state pension funds have $3 to $4 trillion, and we're adding about $1.3 trillion every year. Now, there's a new school of thought in some parts of the Democratic Party that debt doesn't matter, deficits don't matter, we can sell paper as long as we want. I don't agree with that. I do think that it does matter at some point, and we have to deal with this at some point. There's only 3 ways to deal with it. You either increase taxes, you cut spending, or you have higher growth. And right now, I think we don't really have any of these things really going the way we want. So we're going to have to face it at some point. The real issue is, can you postpone this until after the election? Because typically when presidents run for re-election, they don't want to increase taxes before, they don't want to cut spending before, they like to borrow money. So can we keep borrowing as much as we're borrowing and get away with it before the next election is over?
Do you think?
It's going to be a close call. I think we probably can, but I don't know for certain. I think if there's a black swan happening, some war breaks out, or some big dispute, it could be a concern. Right now, we can sell our paper. It's amazing how many people want to buy our dollars. But at some point, people might say, you know, these dollars are not as great as they used to be, and we want a higher interest rate.
Can't tell if I feel better or worse after talking to David about that. Somewhere in between,
well,
maybe?
But the good news is the U.S. economy is in pretty good shape. If you think about it, we're doing better than Europe, we're doing better than any other developed economy in the world, and we've been doing better than any other developed economy for about 10 years now. So we're in pretty good shape. We're just not as good as we could be.